Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to uncover why your brilliant mind might actually be secretly sabotaging your greatest ambitions. Look, if you're tuning into this, you're likely an ambitious, smart, and driven person. You've got big ideas and, frankly, the talent to back them up. Yet you might find yourself totally baffled by your own stagnation. It's a topic that impacts countless highly capable individuals, but it's still largely misunderstood. So today, we're exploring the fascinating and often completely hidden psychology of people who overthink success. We're going to figure out what's really pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Have you ever felt mysteriously stuck or burned out, even when you know you have clear potential? Maybe you just brush it off. You assume it's classic imposter syndrome, a lack of discipline, or just a random drop in your daily motivation. But think about a time when you had everything lined up perfectly. You've got the spreadsheet totally dialed in, the contacts are loaded up, your fingers literally hovering over the send button, and then for some unexplainable reason, you just snap the laptop shut and walk away. You look at your goals, you know exactly what steps to take, yet you find yourself completely paralyzed. Why does a highly capable mind suddenly hit the brakes right before the finish line? What exactly is it trying to protect you from?
Well, we naturally just assume the problem is a fear of failing, right? We think, oh, I'm just worried I'm not good enough, or I'm going to make a fool of myself. But honestly, the reality is so much deeper than that, and much more fascinating. For a lot of chronic overthinkers, the real roadblock is a profound fear of success. It's not about failing at all. It's a deep-seated anxiety about what achieving your goals will actually turn you into, because your current self, flaws and all, is incredibly comfortable. You aren't afraid of the fall. You're afraid of losing who you currently are.
All right, let's look at part 1, identity attached to the journey, or chasing versus catching.
For chronic overthinkers, the journey itself kind of becomes their entire personality. The late nights, the endless planning, the imagining, the chasing, all of that forms the core of who they are. Think of the hustler identity almost like a really comfortable suit of armor. I mean, it's heavy, sure, but man, it protects you. Your mind creates resistance not to failure, but to change. Because if you actually succeed, that striving, struggling version of you has to disappear. You take off the armor, and suddenly you're vulnerable. And strangely, to the human brain, shedding that familiar identity feels like a massive, terrifying loss. You really have to stop and ask yourself, who am I if I'm no longer struggling?
This perfectly explains why so many high achievers absolutely refuse to ask for help. They compulsively try to fix every single problem themselves. It's the sheer exhaustion of self-reliance. You see, many overthinkers learned early on that help isn't guaranteed. So doing everything alone just becomes this automatic reflex. Fixing things gives you a sense of control. If you fix it yourself, you never owe anyone and you never have to be disappointed. Doing it alone feels deeply familiar and way safer than opening up to vulnerability. Acting alone and staying in that struggle phase isn't just a quirking habit, it's a profound survival pattern that keeps your current identity feeling totally secure.
Which brings us to our second theme, the burden of permanence and treating success as a final decision.
Notice how the overthinking mind treats success not as a fluid, exciting state, but as a rigid trap. To an overthinker, success feels like an identity threat. That's the psychological discomfort you feel when a permanent change feels like a loss of autonomy. It's the exact same resistance that makes naturally independent people instinctively hate and reject new rules. They don't hate structure itself. They hate imposed structure because it feels like someone is taking the wheel. When you're just chasing a goal, you're free. But achieving the goal, that feels like stepping into a cage. Success suddenly feels like a final, permanent rule being placed on your life, carrying heavy expectations that you're going to be forced to meet forever.
You probably have that one friend who absolutely refuses to get a tattoo because they think, well, what if I don't like butterflies in 10 years? Guess what? That exact same mechanism is hijacking your career. Just like people who overthink success, people who refuse tattoos value absolute control and deeply fear irreversible choices. They view their identity as constantly evolving, so they reject permanent symbols because permanence means a loss of flexibility. They fear being locked into one version of themselves. And that's exactly how overthinkers fear the perceived permanence, the rigid expectations, and the heavy title of becoming highly successful.
Okay, moving into part 3, living in the mind or mentally experiencing the outcome.
So how exactly does an overthinker's brain process the future before it even happens? Well, people who overthink don't just think about success, they completely live it out in their heads. They vividly imagine the achievement, they experience the recognition, they process all the future outcomes internally. And here's where the neurochemistry kicks in.
By running this incredibly vivid simulation, your brain actually gets a premature dopamine reward. You literally feel the satisfaction just from imagining it. But, and this is a big but, because your brain has already run the entire simulation and gotten its chemical payoff, by the time you need to do the hard work in reality, the motivation is completely gone. Your brain essentially goes, hey, we've already been there, we felt it, why bother doing the actual work?
This intense mental looping, it mirrors how we endlessly overthink a past conversation. Think about it. A conversation ends, and within minute 1, well, by hour 1, your brain is frantically scanning for social mistakes. By day 1, you're replaying the interaction over and over to regain a false sense of control. And by day 2, your mind simply assumes the absolute worst just to find closure. The mind absolutely hates uncertainty, so it spins a massive mental spiral to create false control over an unpredictable outcome. And the kicker is, your brain does the exact same thing with your future success. It overprocesses every single variable until you're completely exhausted by an event that hasn't even happened yet.
Fascinatingly, this heavy mental processing is exactly how advanced human-like AI systems are being built to adapt. They model the complete environment in advance, they connect separate signals into one complex pattern, and they anticipate shifts well before they're visible. But here's the critical difference. An adaptive AI uses this predictive pattern recognition to hack with lightning speed. But the human overthinker, they use this exact same mental modeling to stall, delay, and hesitate. While the AI executes immediately, the human just sits there frozen in a chair, completely anchored down by the overwhelming weight of thousands of predicted variables.
So let's look at part 4, the cost of being seen and the end of hiding.
Let's see how this builds into the absolute terror of being totally exposed to the world. The crucial point here is the stark contrast between the safety of being a quiet processor and the demanding exposure of being a visible success. Take a second to think about this dynamic. People who are quiet processors love to protect their inner world. They sit back, they observe in silence. It's a cozy little shadow where nobody expects much from you. But visible success? That requires you to step right into a harsh spotlight. You are suddenly exposed to public opinion, and worse, you're expected to constantly output at a really high level. It's an incredibly demanding, exhausting shift for a mind that deeply prefers to just stay hidden and safe.
Because the hardest truth we have to face is this: success removes your excuses. When you finally succeed, you can no longer hide behind the safety of potential. You can't tell yourself, oh, one day I'll do this. That one day is a warm, comfortable blanket, and success just rips that blanket right off. You are clearly seen, and you are judged entirely on your clear, undeniable results. For an overthinker, stepping out from the comfortable shadow of limitless potential into the harsh spotlight of actual, measurable results, it's a deeply uncomfortable psychological exposure.
And finally, Part 5, Resisting the New Reality and Outgrowing Your Environment. We really have to examine the hidden resistance to leaving our familiar world behind. True success naturally creates distance from your past, and we need to acknowledge that this can be incredibly lonely. It pulls you away from old familiar habits, and it forces you to set boundaries with people who are used to the old you. Because let's be honest, the old you was probably much less intimidating. This shift is highly similar to the psychology of outgrowing social media. When people outgrow those platforms, they stop seeking external dopamine hits, they filter out the noise, and they shift to intrinsic internal self-worth. They leave the familiar digital noise behind for something real. True success requires that exact same transition, and leaving those familiar people and places behind is a very profound fear.
And really, that brings us to the core realization of this entire explainer. You self-sabotage, not because you don't have the drive. You don't lack the talent or the ambition. No, you stall because leaving your familiar environment and outgrowing your current life feels like an incredibly heavy price to pay. Your brain isn't broken. It's simply trying to protect you from what it perceives as a massive cost. You look at the cost of success, the profound change in identity, the permanence of the new role, the harsh exposure to public opinion, and your mind hits the brakes to keep you safe in the familiar life you already know.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought today. Look at that goal you've been putting off for months, or maybe even years, and ask yourself honestly, what version of yourself are you desperately protecting by staying exactly where you are? If you succeed today, who will you be forced to become tomorrow? Thanks for exploring the mind with me on this one. Keep questioning those hidden patterns, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.